Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I need to breathe for a second. I'm on the verge of tears here.
Well, you had some. You had a lot of important stuff come up.
Yeah.
For you, and
Right. Yeah.
so take your time. Take your time with it, and
So yeah.
Dale, anything you want to say?
No, just that was phenomenal. That was really. I'm really glad she called in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really a great perspective, and I just think, hearing the way people have processed and worked through issues like that and help themselves move forward. I just think we can't hear enough of that kind of individual stories because they're all a little different. So I'm glad she called.
And I think what we see happening with this show is that there are people who are exploring those things and taking really courageous steps and moving forward in a healthy way with their lives. And when those people are parents, it really carries through to the next generation and has a wonderful ongoing type of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that just, when you have parents that have gone through that process of seeking a healthier life,
right.
Then, we can feel more assured that their children are going to have a better upbringing than what they had.
Right. We hope. Sometimes I know it's true that I was beaten, so you're going to be beaten sort of stuff.
But that's not someone who's actually processed. Right,
right.
That's,
totally animal.
That's the worst of the worst.
Which reminds me of an article that when we were researching or talking amongst ourselves about doing this topic for a show, I think you shared an article about the argument of, I turned out okay. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think that just goes back to the need that many people have to only see their upbringing as something positive. And so they will find ways to justify it in whatever way they can. And one of those ways is to say, I was spanked as a kid and I turned out fine. It is way too painful for those people to look at how they didn't turn out fine. Mm-hmm. And it's just part of what they feel they need to do for themselves is to think that, they are in a good place and that what their parents or whoever the adults were in charge were doing were good, because it's just excruciatingly difficult. There's all sorts of cognitive dissonance that goes on to actually observe, as some might say, observe without judgment. One of the highest forms of intelligence, my yoga teacher would say. Mm-hmm. It is essential to get to that point, to be able to look at what happened to you as a child, as an observer, and just as for a certain period of time, try not to attach whatever triggery feelings come up from that and just sit with it for a while. Mm-hmm. No one's going to, you're not going to be struck by lightning. Your parents are going to not disown you. Mm-hmm. Nothing really bad's going to happen if you just take a minute to look at that, to look at who you were as a child. I think that's something that's brought me a lot of peace, actually. I didn't want to think about who Jan, the little girl, was for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know much about that child because I was raised in this household where no feelings were discussed. Mm-hmm. And so I just didn't even quite know anything about myself until I became a young adult and when I was in college. Mm-hmm. So there was all that period of time where it was this kind of blank slate walking around. And, I think I put that off for a long time. But once I did start to look into just who was that child and what was that like when, just sitting alone in the kitchen, where no one is engaging in conversation. I mean, I don't want it to sound like I had a severely abusive childhood, but it was severely neglectful, I think, in emotionally at least. And there's harm that comes with that. But that doesn't mean that I'm like racked with, anger and I want to, go out and hurt somebody. It's not like that. I also am not a huge believer in forgiveness. I'm not like on the forgiveness train. I don't. I think that can be a harmful thing.
It's toxic positivity.
I think it's used to justify bad things. So it's not about that either for me. But I do think that the whole "I turned out fine" thing is just someone putting up a wall because they're just not ready to go back and look at what they experienced as a child.
I think their definition of fine probably has more to do with I am a functioning adult. Yeah, I'm functioning, but for the first 30 years of my life, I was miserable.
I'm not on drugs and I haven't killed anyone.
That's hardly a measure of success.
Or not lately.
Right. Because then I look at how I was and moved in the world as a child, and then look at the children I know who have been raised in happy, loving homes, which I consider mine to be, and other people I know. And they're different people from who I was. That is fine. That's what fine looks like, when they are comfortable in their own skin and they talk because they know they'll be heard and they have opinions and they can emote and they hold nothing back. It's just a different thing. That's what fine looks like.
Right.
And it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong.
And I think that Bethany and many others can, and I think we should have a show just on the topic, I think, of how to navigate relationships with people that, or not navigate them, people that were a huge part of your upbringing, and now you have to make decisions about how much they're going to be in your life. There's so many things. My nonprofit has a Facebook group called Child Friendly Faith, and there are 700 plus people in it, and so many people share stories like that. So I think that's a really important topic to delve into.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. Dale, you've been quiet for a long time. Anything
well, I'm just in total agreement. And I wanted to add to the discussion of the I turned out fine thing, in addition to the question of whether someone turned out fine, which I think is really a good one, whether we are as whole as we could be. There's also that really one of the best examples in that article that you shared is the seatbelt example. And I think it's a way to let people understand how silly I turned out fine is. If you went down the freeway at 90 miles an hour without a seatbelt and weren't killed, and then at the end of it, you advocate not wearing a seatbelt because you weren't killed, that's exactly the kind of logic that is going on when somebody talks about corporal punishment in this way. We know, we have the research, we have the outcomes. I don't even remember if earlier we talked about the details of the Gershoff study. But I think we ought to, did we get to
we did on other shows, but not
on other shows. But if I could just,
that's you, go.
Yeah, quickly insert that because I think it's another powerful aspect of this. Elizabeth Gershoff, who is now at UT Austin and was at Columbia before that, is the go-to for this. She did a powerful meta-study and an analysis of 88 corporal punishment studies in, I think it was 2006. And she updated it in 2016. And it looked at 17 variables, 17 results of corporal punishment, looking at 160,000 children over the course of 50 years of studies. And they isolated 17 variables, and every single variable is negative. In the earlier study, they actually came up with one positive variable, which is immediate compliance, right? So your kids will be more likely to be depressed, more likely to be aggressive, more likely to beat their own children, but they'll do what you ask in the moment. That was the 2006 study. In 2016, that variable didn't even hold up. They discovered that children who are subject to corporal punishment are actually less likely over time to be obedient. They actually become numb to the effect of the corporal punishment and are less likely to be responsive to it. So a child who is reasoned with, who is taught to be self-disciplined, not just disciplined, but self-disciplined, those are the kids who end up having the best outcomes across the board. So the research is there. You can get rid of the fallacy there. It really, we have an awful lot of arrows in the quiver. I shouldn't use that analogy. Oh,
careful.
We've got a lot of pieces on the chessboard. I don't know how to put it. Everything is in place for someone to be reached. You can reach them through the secular parenting books, through the Christian parenting books, and it's really something that there are conversations that we need to have. It's really worthwhile.
And I think that goes back to what I was mentioning about introducing positive concepts as opposed to the negative. So, physical punishment is about focusing on the negative behavior and then trying to make it go away. When we look more at providing tools for children so that we can enhance their well-being. That's the other thing. If you're in a conversation with someone and they want to use the "I turned out fine" thing, and they don't want to, consider all these studies, what you can tell them is that even if you take all those studies away, there is not one study that shows that physical punishment enhances the well-being of children. Mm-hmm. And that's where, I think we want to go with our parenting models. It's not about crushing mm-hmm. the negative and perceiving children in a negative light, mm-hmm. as, for example, as sinful, as what Bethany talked about and what I brought out earlier. It's really about learning about child development and how amazing the brain. I mean, the brain is developing faster than, at any other point in its life during those early years. There's so much fascinating things we can learn about it, and that can just lead to all kinds of good things in parenting.
And it's clear to me right now that we need to have a show on what to do, the right way to discipline, but that's for another show.